So in our last lecture, we were talking about carbohydrates, specifically monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And we're going to start with a few review questions for that, which is going to lead into something that more relates to our body, blood sugar regulation. So I suspect even many of you may have issues with blood sugar problems, or somebody in your family definitely does. And then it also can lead to diabetes, which is what we'll end the lecture with. What I want you guys to get out of this is how our body controls how much of a certain substance, in this case, sugar, is in our blood. Throughout this, we'll also talk about other things that control your body throughout the year. For example, how do you regulate your temperature? How do you regulate how much water is inside of you? And this is all related to that maintaining homeostasis. So this is a big product of mechanisms that your body uses to keep things in balance. So if you look at my picture of me, my fingers, if this are levels, I never get one higher or lower. We try to keep everything in balance. And it's not like that can just be done. So there has to be mechanisms in your body, chemical mechanisms that regulate how things happen. So to start, real quick, one of the big things we're going to need to know for the rest of the year, what type of carbohydrate diffuses into your blood? So what kind of carbohydrate? What is the carbohydrate that is in your blood sugar? And hopefully you're starting to get the idea that that is glucose, which is a monosaccharide. Okay, so glucose is the energy molecule that diffuses into our blood. So if we were to take our blood sample, we could test for how much glucose is in it. They actually call that an A1 test. And what is the purpose of this monosaccharide? Remember, glucose is a monosaccharide. And it has one purpose. It's going to be used in something called cellular respiration, and it is the energy molecule, okay? So it is used for energy for any kind of metabolism, which is any process in the cell, including processes we're going to talk about right now. So any work that needs to be done in the cell, that energy is going to come from glucose. So glucose is super, super, super important. Okay, before we get going on this, I have a lot of vocab words I want you to write down, so we'll kind of put these up. Feel free to pause to write them down after I explain them, but these are some very important words that you guys need to practice learning what they are, okay? Because biology is kind of like learning a new language, as well as learning how systems work in our bodies, but to understand these systems, we also have to know the language of these systems. So that is why I want you to learn these vocab words. The better you learn these, the more you'll be able to understand pretty much anything health-wise or in medicine. And hey, even when you go to the doctor, you'll have a much better idea of what in the world they're talking about. Or maybe it prevents you from being sold some stuff out there that will cost a lot of money, but will do you actually no good for your body. But they prey on people who just have a basic level of science. And they're like, oh, I've heard of DNA, that must be good, so I'm going to buy this DNA shake. Well, that doesn't always work exactly that way. So the more you can become literate in these terms, I think will actually save you money in the future, no matter what you decide to do in your life. So hormones, chemicals that help cells in your body communicate. So hormones, we're going to talk about a lot of them this year, but they tell your cells what to do. They tell them to turn on DNA to make different things. Hormones can be anything from like testosterone that you've probably heard of that caused males to go into puberty, also produces sperm. Estrogen causes females to go into puberty and causes the lovely blood to form in the uterus that causes periods. Other hormones we'll talk about today are insulin and glucagon, and you have other hormones like adrenaline that you've probably heard of. So basically these tell your cells to do something. It's a way that they communicate. We're going to really worry about insulin and glucagon today. So more vocab words. This is not a quiz. I'm sorry, I thought I deleted that, but it's not. I just want you guys to know these terms. So glucose, we've gone over. Glycogen, glucagon, and insulin we're going to define. So glucose is the sugar used by your body for energy, right? It's your blood sugar. Okay, super, super important. When we talk about photosynthesis, cellular respiration, next unit, it's all about glucose. So for first semester, if you can understand glucose, you're well on your way to understanding life. Glycogen is a polysaccharide that the body uses to store sugar. We've talked about that one already. And the two new ones are glucagon and insulin. Glucagon is a hormone that tells your body to change glycogen back to glucose. So remember, we'll go over that again. Insulin, a hormone that tells the cells to take in glucose and reduces blood sugar. Remember, you can pause to write these down and then move on. So what we want to talk about, though, is something called blood sugar regulation. So in order for your body to function correctly, it must have lots of energy, and it has to have a good constant supply of energy. So it needs a certain level of glucose, but it can't go above it. If you actually test your glucose, it's in deciliters per liter of blood. They do a little pinprick, and you want to be right around anywhere from about 80 to about 200 on the high end, but you want to average right around 100. We'll do some graphing with this as well. And you need to regulate the amount you want to keep that number right around that in your blood, so your body has constant energy, but not so much sugar that bad things happen. We'll talk about in a minute. Or too little sugar, which can cause lots of problems too. So an organ that's really important in this is your pancreas. Let's see if I can find a pancreas in my... Looking back here, trying to get a pancreas out. Well, right here, if you guys look on, I'll blow up the big screen now. Uh-oh, I just got rid of it, so never mind. But the pancreas is right below your liver. It's a very, very important organ. It's going to make two hormones called insulin and glucagon. It also produces a lot of digestive enzymes that help you digest food. We'll talk about that coming up in a couple weeks. Okay, so the two hormones it makes are insulin and glucagon. We kind of just defined these. We're going to go over that again. Okay, so insulin is going to allow sugar to be taken into your cells or be stored as glycogen, and it lowers blood sugar. So all around all of your cells is your blood, and inside your blood has glucose. But glucose actually can't pass in and out of the cell membrane. It can't just flow through like water or oxygen. It needs a doorway to go in. It needs a channel, one of those protein channels we talked about in the cell membrane. Okay, and in order to open this channel, it should remain closed. We have to have a key. So there's like, picture it's like a locked door to allow things into the cell, and we have to have a key to allow glucose in. So insulin, that hormone, is the key that when insulin attaches to the cell, it opens the door and glucose is allowed to go into the cell. When the cell has too much glucose, it can shut down, and then the key goes away, or we don't go in. Okay, so insulin is the key to allow glucose into the cell. Glucagon is the hormone that causes liver and muscle cells to break down glycogen into glucose. That's kind of complicated. When blood sugars need to increase. So what happens is, if I'm low blood sugar, I have no more glucose in my cells. Glucose that was stored as glycogen gets glucagon in there, and it breaks it down, and glucose is released back into the bloodstream. Yeah, so glucagon, remember what it really does is it just takes the glycogen and turns it back into glucose to raise blood sugar levels. So we call this, one way I like to remember glucagon is it makes the glycogen go gone. So kind of fun to say, glycogen go gone, a little alliteration. Go gone makes me think agon, glucagon, glycogen go gone. Okay, because it makes the glycogen go gone, and by going gone, it turns it into glucose. Okay, what this actually causes is something called a negative feedback loop. And we're going to look at a lot of feedback loops. It's how we maintain homeostasis inside our cells and inside our bodies. This is more of a whole body process that involves the cell. And it is when an increase in something causes a decrease, maintaining a balance. So basically what that says is, as my glucose levels increase, okay, they can't get too high, so we need to bring them down back to the normal level right here. So as glucose levels increase, that's going to tell the pancreas to make insulin, and then that insulin is going to go to the cells and say, hey, take glucose in to the liver and stuff, and it lowers our blood sugar level. Okay, so it stays at norm. Now, the same thing can happen if my glucose levels decrease. Let's say I'm exercising a lot. I haven't eaten in a long time. My blood sugar levels are going down. I have no new glucose to put in. So now my pancreas is going to release glucagon, which is going to tell my liver to release glucose. So it's going to break down glycogen to glucose, releases it, which brings up my blood sugar. So negative feedback means we're keeping the levels the same. This happens with temperature. Same thing. When you get too hot, what do? What does your body do? Oh man, I start to sweat, smell bad. That sweat causes my body to cool off. So when I get too hot, I cause myself to sweat. When I get too cold, my body has a feedback that tells me, shiver, and it warms me back up. So feedback loops are really, really important to maintain things like glucose level. They also maintain temperature. They maintain how much water is in your body. We'll come back to those a lot. So let's put this in words for how blood sugar regulation works. If your blood sugar is high, insulin is released. We just saw that in the thing. Sugar is then allowed into cells, or glucose is allowed into cells, and the excess glucose is then stored as glycogen. So all of this, these three things are going to do what to your blood sugar level? So if I bring sugar out of blood and into the cells, and then I store that sugar as glycogen, my blood sugar level will decrease because it was high. Okay? So blood sugar levels go down. If blood sugar is low, then we need to release this glycogen and turn it back into sugar. So we're going to go the opposite way here, and glucagon is released. That glucagon makes the glycogen go gone and turns it back into glucose. Okay, and that is going to raise our blood sugar. Okay, you guys are going to have a little activity. You're going to graph this, kind of answer these questions when we're done with the lecture. Okay. Why blood sugar is super important. Here are some signs of low blood sugar and high blood sugar. Here's those words again, hypo and hyper. So hypoglycemia means low blood sugar. So hypo is below, hyper is above. So hypoglycemia can cause sweating, trembling, very hungry. It makes your mood swings, can cause people to be blurred vision. It can actually make you kind of start to hallucinate with too low of sugar. I've seen people, I have a coworker who has diabetes, which we're going to talk about in a minute. When he, blood sugars tank too low because he took too much insulin, can actually cause them to go into a coma, which is really scary, but they'll lose their ability to speak, all kinds of things. Their brain just does not function without sugar. Your brain needs sugar. Doesn't need too much sugar, but it needs sugar, or you will not work very well. High blood sugar, hyperglycemia, can cause you to become dehydrated, so you have a dry mouth, very thirsty. It makes you pee a lot. This is all a sign you have something wrong. Bedwetting because you're peeing a lot can cause severe stomach pain and really high blood pressure as well. So it can be very dangerous. Blood sugar regulations are one of the top causing deaths in the world. Until this year, that diabetes was number 2. Thanks to COVID, it's a little bit behind this year, but don't worry, it'll be back to the number 1 killer unless we fix these problems. So diabetes, I want you to know the 2 types of diabetes. You're going to watch a little video on this as well. But it's a disease of blood sugar regulation. So this is when people are unable to regulate their blood very well. The video I'm going to have you guys watch is actually when a dog discovered it. So a scientist noticed his dog was drinking, ants were eating his dog's urine, and he's like, why is that? And it's because when you have diabetes, you actually end up peeing out sugar. You should not be peeing out sugar because you need sugar. If you're peeing out sugar, you have way too much of it in your blood, and that is a bad, bad thing. Okay, so diabetes is when you can't regulate your blood sugar. And what it really means is you can't regulate your blood sugar. So there's 2 types. We have type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is actually an autoimmune disease. And so your own immune system starts to attack your pancreas. And your pancreas is what makes insulin. So this disease attacks the cells that make insulin in your pancreas. And this means that you cannot make enough insulin. So immune system attacks pancreas, causing a very low amount of insulin to be made, or maybe no insulin at all. Pretty dangerous. We don't know exactly why this happens. It typically happens at a very young age, sometimes upwards of 20s it can still happen. There is very little genetic link to this. Oftentimes people think this is the one that's genetic because it starts at such a young age, but the genetic link is very small to this. We don't know what causes people to have this autoimmune disease, but we think it's probably some type of a virus you get as a kid or something like that, and it ends up attacking your pancreas so you cannot make insulin. Pretty easy to treat. Nowadays, you just give a person a shot of insulin. We actually make human insulin. We take the gene that makes insulin inside a human, like us, and we put it inside a bacteria, and that bacteria makes us human insulin, which is really awesome because about 40 years ago, if you needed insulin, they actually shoved a needle into the pancreas of a pig or a cow, and they would give humans pig and cow insulin. Not quite the same thing, and it didn't work as well. But now that we can make insulin that's human, people with type 1 diabetes aren't that big of a problem. I mean, it's still a major problem, but they can manage themselves well if they take care of themselves and be okay. Type 2 diabetes, this is the one that's really causing problems in America and the rest of the world. This disease causes the most deaths, and we call it lifestyle diabetes because you can make sure you don't get type 2 diabetes by managing what you eat and not overeating sugars. So this one is typically can be reversed if you catch it early. So if your doctor's like, hey, you're pre-onset diabetes, type 2 diabetes, if you start exercising and cut down your sugar intake, and remember sugar can be starches as well because they turn into sugar, you can actually get rid of diabetes and not have a problem with this and have to take medicines and possibly die from it in the future. And what happens in this case is, remember, insulin is the little key. I'm going to go back in time. Insulin is this key that opens the cell to glucose. Well, your body does something weird sometimes. If you continue to just give it so much sugar, well, you keep making more and more insulin, and this cell eventually is like, dude, I don't need that much sugar. And so basically what it does is it stops listening to the key. So when the key attaches, it just goes, nah, I'm not going to do anything. I have plenty of sugar in me. You give me too much sugar. And it stops listening, which means this door stays closed, which means this glucose builds up in your blood. Okay. And so once this door stops working, your cells stop listening to insulin, high glucose levels can happen in your blood. This can be very bad. It's going to make you pee glucose, which is bad. Bacteria also love high amounts of glucose, so it makes you much more likely to get infections. And it actually starts to cause nerve damage and heart problems. People who have type 2 diabetes and haven't managed it correctly can be really rough. A lot of them end up having to have pieces of their foot cut off, if not their whole foot cut off. All kinds of problems. And it is the, I think, number 2 killer in the United States at this point in time behind heart disease. So take care of your body. Be careful if you eat a ton of sugar. Make sure you're exercising. You can be okay. Because it's caused by diet mostly, it is more common in older people, but scary obesity in children. We're actually starting to see type 2 diabetes in children as well. And this one actually does have a larger genetic link. This doesn't mean that genetics is the be-all for it, but people who have type 2 diabetes in their family, like if you have grandparents who have it, parents that have it, you are much, much, much more likely to have type 2 diabetes, which means you should really, really watch your sugar intake and your carbohydrate intake and make sure you're exercising regularly. People who don't have it in their family can still get it if you really overeat and don't exercise ever. But people who have the genetic link can even be in fairly good shape and everything else and still end up with diabetes. So that is our talk on diabetes. You guys have a little worksheet that's going to go along with that. That's going to be like your lecture questions today. And have a wonderful day.